Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. My name is Sophia Aaron, and I'm the Global Blockchain Business Council's Senior Analyst. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Global Blockchain Business Council and Global Digital Finance's Global Leaders Series. This is a weekly global town hall that we host with policymakers and business leaders around the world to hear insights into their work, the state of blockchain and the digital asset industry, and current global affairs. Today, we have the pleasure to be joined by Algorand's CEO, Steve Kokinos, and our host, Sandra Rowe. She is GBBC's CEO and a GDF board director, for a conversation and live audience Q&A on how Algorand is working on removing frictions from financial exchange. Just briefly before we begin, I would like to introduce Steve. Steve, as I said, is currently the CEO of Algorand and is responsible for their overall business vision and strategy. He is a serial entrepreneur and most recently was co-founder and executive chairman of Fuze. Under his direction, the company transformed the way enterprises view collaboration as a key driver of business visibility, processes, improvements, and result. And today, the company has over 700 employees servicing over 1,500 enterprise customers around the world. Prior to Fuze, Steve also founded BladeLogic, which is a recognized leader in data center automation market with a Fortune 500 client list. And prior to BladeLogic, he was founder of and CEO of WebYes, an early market leader in the web hosting and application services arena that provided infrastructure services for Sun Microsystems, Netscape, Lycos, among others. We are so pleased to have Steve with us here today. We can't wait to dive in and ask him questions about his background, Algorand, and everything else. So please, we welcome your questions at any point during today's webinar. You can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And without further ado, I'll hand things over to Sandra to kick us off. Thank you.
Sophia, thank you so much for that introduction. And Steve, would love to welcome you on board. Hi, Steve.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for the next 55 minutes or so. Just want to kick off by laying the background. So Steve, in terms of, you're now CEO of Algorand. Could you talk to us a little bit more about how you got to be CEO of Algorand, and then Algorand itself for those who may not be familiar?
So, I'm a serial entrepreneur and had been, started companies. I started my first one when I was, 19 in early days of the internet. I guess around 2017, end of 2016, had a number of friends who were sort of early Bitcoin miners who had been trying to convince me to, get interested. Finally found myself with some time on my hands and, really started to dig into, both blockchain as a technology and crypto, and found it to be, really fascinating. I think also for me personally, felt like it had a lot of parallels to what I saw in the early days of the internet, which was just this very dynamic environment and ecosystem with people that were really passionate and philosophical about, how you could potentially change the world with new technology. And from there, the folks at Pillar and also Union Square Ventures introduced me to Silvio, and suggested that if I was going to get into the space, he'd be a good person to talk to and start with, and found the work that he was doing at Algorand to be really fascinating. I think for anybody who hasn't taken some time to do it, or doesn't know who Silvio is, Silvio Micali is a Turing Prize winning cryptographer, and really by all accounts, one of the founders of modern cryptography. And, I think one of his best skills, in addition to just having brilliant ideas, is that he's able to explain very complicated topics very simply. And so for anyone here who hasn't, I'd encourage you to go take a look at one of his videos that explains how many different things work. But in any event, really felt that his sort of philosophical view that decentralized systems and blockchains really represented the future, not only of digital money and programmable money, but more broadly a way to really rethink the financial systems and ultimately provide for financial inclusion and get many more people involved in the modern economy. And the more we talked about it, the more it really felt like there was a big opportunity. And so that's kind of how things got started. I originally came on, sort of as a board member, and then later joined on full time, because as I've spent more and more time, I think it's, there are sort of endless possibilities here, which is great.
Yeah, we're going to talk a bit more about financial access and removing frictions. And I have to say, I met Silvio a couple years back at a Pillar event during Boston Blockchain Week. And, absolutely, anyone who doesn't know who Silvio is, they should definitely check out some of his videos and writings. He's a brilliant mind, but also a very good human. So I highly advocate. I agree, Steve. So let's talk a little bit specifically around how Algorand is different from as a blockchain protocol versus others. If you could just unpack for the audience, and some of our audience are not blockchain aficionados, so if you could kind of distill the key differences between Algorand's blockchain versus others.
Sure. Well, I think that the blockchain that people know, or most frequently we know, is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin and many other blockchains are driven by what's called proof of work, and the simple version of that is people run miners, and a miner is just a computer that is solving cryptographic puzzles. And as the network grows, you have more and more miners, and the idea is that the first person to solve a puzzle wins. Now, the good part of that is as the underlying tokens become worth more, anyone who wins some of those tokens for having done the work to propose a new block. But also, as tokens become worth more and the network becomes bigger, it becomes harder and harder for people to solve those puzzles, which requires more and more machinery, or more and more compute power, more and more electricity. And the other is because there are just some thorny computer science problems in distributed computing, the way that you avoid problems cropping up in those sorts of networks is effectively to make them slow. So in Bitcoin, it takes about 10 minutes for a transaction to be confirmed, and then because you need to wait a little bit longer to make sure that it stays on the chain, it's sort of recommended that you wait maybe 6 blocks or so to consider your transaction final. And so, there's power consumption, which isn't necessarily a great thing. There's computational requirements, and there's speed. And so if you look at all those things together, Bitcoin is fascinating work and incredibly innovative, but also has some challenges if you're going to deploy to hundreds of millions or billions of people. And that was really what Silvio was trying to solve for when he designed the Algorand protocol. And the way Algorand works is a little bit different, I think, and somewhat unique in that in Algorand, well, so first of all, Algorand is a public permissionless blockchain. So anybody can join, anybody can be part of the network. But what is fundamentally different is that those users are the ones who power the network. And the users who hold the money are the ones who power the network more specifically. So every token in Algorand represents a vote towards consensus, towards the next block, and every user in the system is called on at random to participate and contribute to that consensus. And the way it works, I think, is simple to say. The technology behind it is quite complex.
Right.
But the quick version is that for all the users that are online, one user is selected at random to propose a block, and 1,000 users are selected at random to confirm the block. And every block, it's a new proposer and a new set of validators. And that's different than the way that works in other chains. Now, you might ask how those people are selected. What's unique about Algorand is that each person who's online self-selects themselves effectively by running a cryptographic lottery on their computer. Now, because it's done in secret, neither the person proposing or the people confirming know who each other are. They don't talk to each other, but they do present the winning ticket that proves that they were selected as the block is circulated around the network. And so what ends up happening is a block is circulated along with those signatures. It only takes literally a millisecond for them to run that lottery and present their signature. So that's very fast. And the speed never changes regardless of how many users you have on the system, because it's always a committee of relative of relatively similar size. And so in terms of, why that's secure, before a block is proposed, you have no idea who's going to propose it, and you have no idea who's going to confirm it. And then after you find out about the block, you only know who those people were, but it's too late to attack them because you've moved on to the next block and it's a whole new set of people again. So effectively in Algorand, it is sort of all the users of the network that provide security, and they do so in a way that's very hard to attack and very simple in concept, but really represents some groundbreaking computer science and uses of cryptography.
Amazing. Thank you for unpacking that for the audience. And I want to talk about, now that you've laid the groundwork for how Algorand's blockchain works and how it's confirmed, a transaction is confirmed, I'd love to talk about, the elements that make Algorand and what you guys are doing unique in terms of removing frictions in financial exchange. So let's talk about some of the problems today. I think there's actually quite a few, but what problems are you guys specifically solving for that you can point to?
Yeah, well, if you take a step back and you look at, what people are often trying to do on blockchains, they're trying to tokenize assets of varying forms. Sometimes those may be securities. Sometimes they might be non-fungible tokens. They might be currencies. It really depends on what people are doing. The second is, people ultimately have assets. You want to exchange them for other assets, and you need ways to do that seamlessly. And I think one of the most important things that public blockchains do is give people that have no reason to trust each other a way of transacting where they can rely on the system. But that requires a certain set of kind of fundamental features that live in the protocol, in our opinion, that enable that. So atomic transfers are second one, in addition to being able to create assets, both one person, one asset to multiple people and multiple assets. So you can construct, very complex things. And when that transaction happens, everybody receives, the swapped asset in a single step. So nobody has to worry that there potentially could be, adversely affected by that transaction. The third area we'll put a lot of time into is smart contracts, and in particular, layer 1 smart contracts, which allow for really programmable money. And I think one of the things there's sort of two things that are unique about our smart contract systems. One is they're very fast. So they run at the full speed of the blockchain. There is no performance penalty for running a smart contract versus a simple transaction. And so when you start to think about wanting to create new forms of financial products and wanting to deploy those to millions and millions of users, scale, speed, performance, computational requirements do become very important in those cases. And so really everything in Algorand has been engineered to run at effectively wire speed, so the speed of the blockchain. And transactions are confirmed in about 4 seconds, so very quick, comparable to a traditional payment system. And when transactions complete, they're immediately final. There's only one way to get a block in Algorand, so there's no risk of sort of temporary forking and that sort of thing. And more kind of specific to financial applications, when we really think about that, one of the problems we think that exists with traditional smart contracts and a lot of first generation systems is that it's simply too complex for people who are looking to create an asset, who are looking to provide conditional applications that determine when an asset can be transacted, when it can't. And so what we've looked at is effectively a simpler set of requirements that enable people to do what they need, but do it in a way that doesn't require formal verification, that doesn't expose them to the potential of loss due to a bug, loss of money or theft of money due to a bug in a smart contract that wasn't well understood. And so I think that's one of the big things, is that both Algorand processes transactions very quickly. All of our features happen at the full speed of the chain, and those features are presented as a set of primitives in layer 1 in the protocol itself, where people effectively have the safety and security of the protocol for everything they're trying to do. And we think as higher value financial products come on chain, that sort of set of criteria is going to be, an absolute requirement for them.
So appreciate you, explaining some of that. For the average consumer, for someone who's going to be using this as a consumer, some of the benefits you've already delineated, it's going to be speed, just like any other payment transaction, if it's a payment transaction. It's a certainty that you don't have some of the issues around potential temporary forking or some of the other, potential problems that we've seen in other protocols. But as a consumer, what do I ultimately get that makes this a better future infrastructure?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think there's a couple of things. One, as a consumer, you don't need to know about sort of every platform that's underlying an application you're using. I think that's an important point. If you fire up Netflix, they're using Amazon Web Services behind the scenes, and the average Netflix user probably doesn't know that or need to even really care. I think what's important is that people need confidence that their financial transactions are backed by infrastructure and networks that have been designed that have been purposely built and designed to make their transactions secure and just enable them to transact in the way they want. So I think that's very important. I also think doing that in a way that's global and that isn't censorable is very important as well. And so I think at a baseline, consumers need to understand that that the applications they're choosing are transacting in that way and will work the way they need them to. I think the second, though, is that's actually, only sort of partially related to the end user, which is developers need to be able to build very simply, and we need to be able to focus more on building great user experiences that end users want, and less on having to learn all the nuts and bolts of the underlying technology. And so I think the other side of that coin is really developer experiences and how we make it easy for people to start using blockchain. And that's been a big focus of ours as well. So I think it's a little bit of both sides, but definitely there needs to be better developer and end user experiences, and end users need to ultimately be able to trust the platforms they're transacting on. I mean, think back to the first time you bought something on the web. I remember I was like, I don't know, am I about to get robbed? I think it's always a little bit nerve-wracking when people start using new systems, and finding ways to build trust and make sure that they feel confident, I think is very important. So I think that, that's the sort of two parts of it that are really important to enable people to start transacting more.
That's absolutely a great point, and appreciate that. You've actually started getting some questions in, but I'm going to hold off for just a second. I'm going to ask a couple more, and then we'll move over to Q&A from the audience. You mentioned the word global, and as a GBBC member, we appreciate your support, and we are looking at it from a global perspective. Love it if you could talk a bit about the work that Algorand is doing around the world, and more specifically around the BSN international network, the Solve initiative in Marshall Islands. So if you can just touch upon some of those projects, really appreciate it for the audience who may not be as familiar with all the various activities you guys are doing.
Yeah, sure. And I guess, broadly, if we take a look at where, we've been spending a lot of our time, it's, encouraging DeFi applications to come take a look at Algorand. I think we're gaining some good traction there. And, sort of a precursor to that is, the focus we've had on bringing stablecoins to the platform. USDC launched just a couple of weeks ago, adding to kind of a roster of great stablecoins that we have on chain. The second area is just thinking about more traditional banking and payment applications and how, how those will want to take advantage of blockchain. And the third is, you mentioned the Marshall Islands with central bank digital currencies. And so, if you look at Algorand as a consensus protocol, that's sort of one piece. But then if you look at, all the layer 1 functionality that we've rolled out, that's really designed to kind of help all those types of applications, grow. And then, recent announcements around co-chains, around layer 2 smart contracts. I think this is where we're, continuing to, build the platform that people need. Now, in terms of how we think about things more broadly, I think it's definitely the case that sort of each of the markets I described have slightly different technical needs. They have slightly different requirements in terms of how they intend to go to market, how they intend to use the technology. And so we've tried to be thoughtful, around that. And so if you look at BSN in China, that's a real effort that's sponsored by the Chinese government to bring public blockchains into the country. We're really excited to be one of a handful of chains selected to be part of that network. And I think this is also where, interoperability matters a lot. So another example you mentioned is the Marshall Islands. Marshall Islands is going to be deploying their national currency, the SOV, on Algorand in the coming months. And we're really excited to be helping them with that. I think what we're starting to see, though, is one, there's applications that will live on Algorand. Then there's applications that may live elsewhere. We think all those assets need to move back and forth. And whether your assets natively on Algorand or whether you want to take advantage of some of the functionality, interoperability between different chains is really important. So the way we think about it is, in the case of BSN, we think that that's a terrific gateway into a huge audience for blockchain and a platform like Algorand. But at the same time, there's some technical requirements that need to be met to be able to handle an application like that, where there definitely are restrictions that are going to be resident in China that maybe not exist in other parts of the world.
Right. Absolutely. You're getting a whole bunch of questions here, but you said the bingo word for me, which was interoperability. And a little bird told me that we should probably cover this because you have some, not only obviously views on it, but perhaps an anecdote to share with us. So what are your views around, and I think you just said cross-chain, access back and forth. People are going to want to swap assets. Absolutely. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. How do we get there? What are your views on this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things. I guess first, we believe pretty strongly that it's going to be a multi-chain world. It already is today. And I think more than that, while nobody wants to use history as a guide too much, I don't think we've ever seen kind of any big tech wave that ended up with only one technology as the output of it. So I think in all of these sort of world-changing waves, whether it was telecom or the internet or now blockchain, there was suites of technology and stacks that kind of emerged, and we think the same is likely here. If we look at the ways that you can think about interoperability, I think there's really a few different ones, and we're working on all of them. First is today you effectively need to learn a new smart contract language for every platform that you want to deploy onto. We think that that's probably not the right long-term solution, which is why we've partnered with Blockstack on the Clarity language. Clarity, if you use Clarity, you'll be able to deploy both Algorand smart contracts and Blockstack smart contracts to start, just by a matter of the way you construct your smart contract. And we think that that makes it much easier for developers to start taking advantage of different chains for different reasons. If you wanted to instantiate your asset and use atomic swaps and have sort of complicated financial conditions, that's something that's very easy to do in Algorand. You may have other reasons to plug into identity or other sort of developer tools in Blockstack. And so I think that we're hopeful that other people will take a similar view and start to look at how they make their virtual machines compatible with Clarity. The second is just movement of assets between chains. We think is really important, and we think that there needs to be decentralized, permissionless token bridges that exist. I think one of the problems in exchange today is that historically a lot of either movement of assets between chains or even exchange of assets has been pretty heavily centralized. Now I think it's starting to change, but I don't think the same level of research and thought has gone into how you create permissionless bridges and interoperability between chains as has been in other areas. And so that's something that we're very focused on as well, because we think over time, we think the major public blockchains really represent a ecosystem of decentralized apps and financial applications, and they need to be able to talk to each other. If you think back to the early days of the telephone, it was like New York had one system, and Boston area had another one, and you would have to get connected between the systems because they didn't really connect to each other. That all seems sort of silly now, as probably does the telephone itself. But I think it's as networks became more seamless and just interoperate in a way that is transparent to end users, that's how you really start to see network effects and grow applications more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you make an excellent point about, we're really just at the beginning of this long journey. And frankly, just like any other tech wave, it's kind of clunky. And when you look back to the original versions of things, you're like, oh my God, how unsophisticated they looked. Well, we're probably going to feel the same way about blockchains, version 1.0 versus 10.0 down the road. So appreciate that. There was a question here that's actually very similar to what you just touched upon from Mauro, asking if Algorand's blockchain is suitable with every kind of smart contract. I think you've already kind of answered that, but maybe you could just distill a little bit more about what you're planning to do. So obviously you're working with Blockstack and Clarity, but what are the sort of future plans to allow for lots of different types of smart contracts to work? And also the follow-up question was, will it work better with particular use cases or cover all manner of use cases?
Sure. So I guess the answer to that question is that we have focused on two forms of smart contracts here at Algorand. The first are layer 1 smart contracts, which are effectively a set of relatively limited smart contracts. They're very flexible, but you could almost think of them as assembly code, where you need to write something that's very fast, very secure, and runs at full speed of the blockchain. And that is especially, I think, well suited to any sort of financial transaction or anything where you need to know, exactly what the outcome is, and it's deterministic. So there's no question about what the outcome of your smart contract is going to be. Within our layer 1 smart contract system, there are both stateless, i.e. run once, and stateful or long-running smart contracts where you can keep state on the chain. And so that allows for the combination of those two things, allows for very flexible applications to be written. Now, we have also published a paper recently on our layer 2 general purpose smart contract approach. That also is slightly different from the way other people have approached smart contracts, in that our smart contracts our layer 2 smart contracts rely on layer 1 smart contracts, where a commitment is made on chain that a smart contract will be executed. It's then executed off chain, but done in a way that's provably secure, and then comes back on chain when it's done. And that doesn't necessarily mean one block. It could be, it could come back tomorrow. It depends on how long it takes for that application to run. But the idea is that when it comes back, it then commits the answer to the chain along with the proof that it was done honestly. And so our thinking is that there are certain transactions that need to happen at the speed of the chain, and some of those are financial, but there's others as well, and those should happen in layer 1 for applications that are longer running or that require more compute. There's general purpose smart contracts that happen in layer 2 and get computed off chain, but you need the layer 1 system to be able to make the commitments so that you can then go and run heavier compute off chain. And we think that dividing those two things is a way to ensure that, one, developers can choose both the level of speed and security and certainty of their application, but then secondly, have the flexibility to write larger applications, but not be constrained by what can be processed in the scope of one block. And so, that's really why we've taken the approach we have. And we think that the combination of those two things give a lot of flexibility to virtually any sort of application that people are looking to write.
Thanks for that, Stephen. I think it's not something that everyone was intimately familiar with, unless they're obviously intimately working with Algorand, so appreciate that. Let's talk about DeFi, because we've obviously seen since the beginning of 2020 And frankly, I don't know that really has anything to do with what's going on with the pandemic, but we've seen an explosion of DeFi adoption and application and experimentation. Could you talk a little bit more about, it's a question from Mahendra, actually he's our Singapore GBC ambassador, asking about how Algorand correlates with DeFi. So if you could explain a little bit about what's going on, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, one of the things that we certainly needed, we think, was stateful smart contracts in layer one. And so if you look at all the things that we've described in terms of kind of financial primitives that we have on the blockchain, we think all those are real enablers, whether it's atomic swaps, stateful and stateless smart contracts, the ability to create assets and manage them. And I think what we're starting to see now is some, really interesting examples coming on chain. So just this week, IBMR launched MESE.io, which is a micro asset that's able to leverage Algorand's sort of speed and low transaction fees, but effectively they're allowing people to buy small fractions of equities outside the US. And it's really targeted at people in the developing world who A, don't have traditional access to the equities markets, and B, probably don't really have traditional access to most financial services or even an international bank account. And so now, they've tokenized equities and are able to kind of offer that. And we think that that's a really interesting kind of use case of people starting to build applications, out on top of Algorand. I think on the other side of things, IDEX is building a decentralized exchange on top of Algorand. On-chain liquidity is we think a real driver of DeFi applications, and something you'll be hearing more about. But then also there's things like Monerium, which is regulated e-money in Europe. We think is a great example, or USDC, like I mentioned earlier, and applications like Archax, which is the first regulated security token exchange in the UK. So I think what we're starting to see now are more applications deploying. I think some of them are, in the DEX, like DeFi space, as you think of it, but others are taking advantage of the financial infrastructure and deploying, regulated financial products that are being offered in a different way than they have in the past. And I think that's what's exciting to us. I think there's a real spectrum of DeFi applications that are out there right now. So we're excited to see, everything from the more decentralized to more regulated. We think that at some point, those kind of two worlds are going to intersect, and the more applications that are on a platform like Algorand, the more valuable it makes underlying features like atomic swaps for any of our users.
Right. And you said a lot there, which I want to drill down a couple different things related around, a lot of people use the term financial inclusion or financial access, democratized finance. There's a lot of these kind of buzzwords, right?
Yeah.
You guys are really trying to make sure that happens. And that's a really important point. And there's a question here, and I'm going to tie this all together, and the question back to you, which is, how do you see Algorand, and then in particular, someone's asking about USDC, being positioned in countries where the banking system and the financial services systems are just not trusted, or they're just not doing, what they're supposed to do, which is to provide, access and services to everyone, not just a select few. If you could talk a little bit more about that, I think this audience, in particular, finds it a very crucial thing and a mission to solve and to work together to offer these things.
Yeah, well, we couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I mean, for sure. And that's been, part of Silvio's vision from day one. So I think one of the things that I think is sort of important there to recast is that decentralized public permissionless systems are incredibly important in that pursuit. I think one of the fundamental sort of tenets of the blockchain world is that you have systems that can't be controlled or altered, where there's no censorship possible, and no one country or entity can decide kind of what users can and can't do. So I think at a baseline, that's quite important. I think one of the things you do see that has come up a lot in the market is that there are, protocols or systems that have made decentralization compromises in order to achieve, performance or something else. And I think that's something that we've always felt that there's kind of a way forward where you can solve these performance, you can solve the performance challenges, but do it in a way that isn't sacrificing decentralization. And I think we're one of very few that are doing that. And I think what that then gives a path toward is systems where people that may not, have, may not have the kinds of opportunities within their country that we have here in the US, can now transact in ways that are very similar. So I think that's important. The other, though, is, the world is becoming, much more global. And if you think about, whether it's a small or medium-sized business or whether it's just two people, if I want to buy something, let's say I want to buy something from you, Sandra, and you want me to send you the money first, and I want you to send me what I'm buying before I send you the money,
Right.
this sort of dilemma, I think is one that comes up a lot. And I think what decentralized systems do and smart contracts do is give people a way to codify how those transactions will work. And that helps people because in cross-border transactions, there effectively is no financial or legal remedy for a party that feels they weren't treated fairly. Certainly for very big countries that are very big companies, they can go and figure that out. So I think that's kind of, there's sort of two sides. I think that's why, if you look at people in the Western world, they ought to care about decentralized systems, because if you just look at the global supply chain, it's a much more efficient way of transacting. I think for people who, happen to live in places where they don't have access to systems or may not, get access to, or their government may not provide them the things they need, now they can use tools like decentralized. So I think that's kind of, one part, but I think an important one. And I think that's a question that I hear a lot, why does decentralization even matter?
Right, right. And to add on to that, discussion point we're delving into right now, what did you think about people who say that the pandemic has caused an acceleration of this? Do you agree with that? And what are some of your thinking around, we're kind of living in this new world, and it's going to stay this way for a while, at least that's my personal opinion. We've all adapted to it, but that doesn't mean that, we all love it or that it's great. I guess the question now I have is, does it accelerate the need to have these systems in place in places where especially it's pretty clear it's broken?
I think it does in some cases. I mean, I guess there's some reasons that maybe we wouldn't have thought of before, but I think a lot of countries are just asking themselves whether handling physical money is something that they should be encouraging people. And so
Yeah.
there's just there's some simple questions there. What I think we've seen is that while I think there's some acceleration happening, I think some of that was going to happen anyway. As an example, China is clearly very serious about rolling out a central bank digital currency. We now see many other countries and are engaged in, on quite a few projects with countries thinking about moving to digital currencies. And so I think that seems like it's in full steam. I think some of that has to do with people worrying about, China getting a, big lead in kind of a new area. I think some of it is related to the pandemic. I think as often is the case when, tech waves really take off, it's sort of a combination of technical need and sort of social drivers that move things ahead. So, I think the fact that the world is a little bit different place this year than it was last year, I don't think has hurt some of the momentum that was starting to build anyway. I do think, beyond that though, I think one of the side effects of people being effectively kind of cooped up at home is I think there is, at least from my point of view, a lot of focus that's been shifted to longer term investments. And I think we've seen that in different industries, certainly at least ones where they have the latitude to do that. And I think it's led a lot of people to start to explore blockchain and crypto more and start to understand how a lot of the work there is sort of intersecting more traditional finance. And I can give you a couple of examples that I
Yeah.
think are interesting. So Republic is launching an Algorand. They are a crowdfunding platform. Republic has launched a Reg A Plus security token on top of Algorand. And what's interesting there is the holders of that token have invested in different projects at Republic. And the way Republic pays out fees is by issuing USDC on chain to any of the people that are Republic holders. And so I think that's a really interesting use case of both, USDC, which is natively available on the Algorand chain, also a security token launching using our ASA framework, and those things working together to really create a financial application that doesn't sort of exist in that form in the traditional world. So I think that's that's a really exciting one. Another one that's sort of in flight right now is the World Chess Championship is in the process of going public on the London Stock Exchange, but they have a lot of fans that are not able to access the London Stock Exchange because they have hundreds of millions of fans all over the world. So they're actually doing a hybrid IPO where they'll list their token on the exchange. They're also going to do a security token offering. So then, people can digitally purchase some of their equity, and, they'll be completely compliant in the UK and exchange listed, but also found a way to be able to offer that same equity out to, people all over the world, regardless of whether they have access to a brokerage account or not. And so I think these are the kinds of things that we're seeing more and more of that make us excited, because I think they really represent new thinking that in some cases is taking advantage of sort of both old and new ideas, but is sort of bringing them forward in a way that I think couldn't really exist in the traditional financial world. So I think it's these examples where people are breaking new ground, have really big audiences that they're working with, and bringing new users into the blockchain world that are great. And it just chess as an example has, I believe it's about 200 million people play chess online every day. So that's a pretty big audience where certainly not all of those people are exposed to blockchain today. And separate from their listing, chess is actually in the process of bringing the results and rankings from every online chess game onto Algorand. So those will start to be posted, and now everyone's ranking and game results will be available and immutable. So nobody can, there's no way to claim that anyone falsified the results of their games.
I love that example so much for so many different reasons. But the one I'm going to pull out from that example is the access to investing in something that you love, which in this case it's chess, but it can be a company, and not everyone has a brokerage account. Absolutely true. And I will tell you, last year we were partners with the WFE, which is the World Federation of Exchanges, and these represent all the biggest exchanges around the world. And as we know, they're very highly regulated. And look, the people there would love to offer equities if they could, in a way that was safe and secure for the average person. But the reality is that the global holding in equities, stock markets, is single digit percentage of the population holds equities, which means, the whole wealth gap that people talk about, it's real. So initiatives like this, examples like this, I think are just the tip of the iceberg for true access to capital markets and innovation. And that's where I personally get excited. I'm glad you guys are doing it. It's really awesome.
Yeah, I just one thing to add on there. I mean, I think one of the things that also needs to happen is, think about lending markets as an example. Today, most crypto lending is collateralized or way over collateralized. Whereas, if you look at some of the more traditional, let's just say like credit card issuers or others, they extend credit to millions of people. Right now those two worlds don't really meet. But I think over time, this is where there's opportunities for crossover into the developing world. And I think that's a growth opportunity for everybody, because typically those people aren't served by kind of these traditional products. And by creating new peer-to-peer versions of them, you can start to really do things that are both meaningful to the people who need them, but also are growth opportunities for the people creating those financial products and tools. So I think it's going to be interesting to see not only how new products take form, but also start to really see how they benefit people kind of everywhere in the world and not just in one place.
Absolutely. I think the crossover opportunities where traditional infrastructure can't provide the services that we just talked about, for those companies and entrepreneurs out there who can solve for that, I mean, that's the holy grail as far as I'm concerned in terms of widening the access across the world. So that's fantastic. I would love to, we've got about 10 minutes left, and would love to just have you talk a little bit about more, you've seen a number of tech waves. You're clearly a serial entrepreneur and very successful. When you think about where crypto and stable coins and CBDC are today, what are some of the things that you're looking for to see how we cross over, how this all sort of starts melding into what we call mass adoption? What types of things are you looking for? Do you have any views on where we are today? Are we still
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's a bunch of ways to answer that. I guess where I would start is if you look at, say 2017, right? And everyone's going crazy for Bitcoin and Ethereum, especially, or especially those two. It was very early, right? There wasn't a ton of institutional involvement. There weren't, tons of enterprises and countries, building applications and thinking about these things. So it was very early. I think if you fast forward, now we're just a few years later. I don't think there are very many countries in the world that aren't thinking about central bank digital currencies right now. So I think that's something that virtually all of them are at least researching, and many of them are starting to look to put into action. So that's a completely different dynamic just in and of itself. I think the second is, you can start to see that I think what happened was, things moved from kind of the retail world to family offices thinking that this might be kind of a higher yield, interesting investment category, to one where they then started talking to institutions, and then the institutions had to get, more serious about what they're doing. And so whether it's, being able to have Fidelity custody, your Bitcoin for you, or the fact that, now nationally chartered banks can, custody crypto assets. I think we're starting to see that, while it's happening slowly, there are regulations coming into play that are sort of playing into this effectively, merging of crypto and traditional finance. We're seeing institutions start to roll out products and make it easier for their customers. And I think that's a very, very different place than we were a couple of years ago. And then I think what we are starting to see separately is, I think the DeFi applications are like fascinating, and we're seeing, so many examples of financial products that simply couldn't have existed and can't exist in a traditional financial world. And so I think, all those things together, really feel like they're, I think, starting to shape a crypto and a blockchain economy more than just kind of individual things. So I think that's kind of one side of it. I think on the other side, one of the things we really look for are, what are signs that that applications are starting to get scale and get traction that are bringing new users in. I think because it's one thing to have kind of this relatively same group of people and some growth kind of, rattling around in the blockchain world, but I think you really need to go from the 100 million to billions of users. And I think this has happened in kind of other tech movements too. And I think what gets us really excited is like applications like Props that launched recently on Algorand. So they have about 5 million users. They migrated several million users to Algorand, are growing very, very quickly. It's a loyalty token system, so it gives people a way to earn money for using the applications that they like, and they're having great success there. I think as applications like that go from 5 to 20 to 100 million users, that's then not only just a successful application. Now you have an enormous number of users from just one application that have been added into the blockchain world and now understand what's going on and can take advantage of digital money. And so I think that, you know, that's one example, but we have a whole bunch. And I think what gets me excited almost more than anything else is seeing those applications start to deploy. And, you know, certainly we're going to have, you know, quite a bit more of that showing up on Algorand. So, you know, stay tuned. But for me, it's what applications are breaking through and bringing just, you know, new users into the blockchain ecosystem
Right.
that haven't been there before.
Right, absolutely. Think we're really kind of ramping up for that. We're not quite there yet, but we're definitely beginning to see some big numbers and rival potentially some of the traditional financial services markets out there in terms of volume and numbers over time. To round out our last few minutes with you, as an entrepreneur, there are lots of entrepreneurs who may be listening. It's been challenging. It's obviously been a very different world from this community, which tends to travel probably a little too much pre-pandemic. I myself included, our carbon footprint, I think we should all be kind of mindful about. Maybe we readjust that going forward. But what advice do you give to entrepreneurs who are struggling, who may not be obviously as successful as Algorand right now? What advice and what, you know, kind of nuggets of wisdom can you impart upon those who are, you know, they keep fighting, persevering?
Well, first, certainly that. I mean, I think the only way through is to you know, keep at it. You know, I guess for me, I have the benefit of being an old entrepreneur now versus a young one, and you know, I think what we're seeing right now, it's not that dissimilar to what we saw in, say, you know, 2001. We saw, you know, even weirder times in like 2007, 2008. You know, I think that was a very tough time to be building a business. You know, and I think we have an unusual situation today. You know, I guess the one sort of common thread I would say through all of those is that, you know, it's usually not the companies that, you know, are kind of like splashy or buzzy, like on the beginning, that win. It's the companies that are just busy doing their work and are building. And I think one of the nice things about sometimes when you have a little bit of an uncertain world is that you can just go about your business without a lot of noise being there. And so I think what has almost always happened is when times are difficult, it's the companies that go and are quietly building and not saying that much that tend to emerge when things improve and end up being huge successes. And so I think my advice to anyone would just be, you know, keep your head down and keep doing the work and you know, just do what you believe in, and ultimately, you know, things always turn for the better, and it's the companies that are ready to take advantage of that tend to win in the market. Right,
absolutely. And unlike other technologies out there, I have to say this one is the most collaborative I've ever partaken in, and frankly, you know, there's always a helping hand somewhere out there, so rely on each other as well, and we'll get through it.
Sure. For sure.
Time, Steve. It's been great. We know you're incredibly busy, and we appreciate the entire Algorand team for the hard work. And frankly, some of the problems that you are solving for are just good for not only the bottom line, but at the end of the day, it's also good for society. And we need more solutions to some of the problems that are out there in the world. So I appreciate your time, appreciate your views, and I'm going to hand it back over to Sophia. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sandra. It was really great being on. We'll talk more soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, thanks so much, Steve. Thank you, Sandra. Everyone, if you enjoyed today's conversation, we will be sharing a recording of it online for those who were able to tune in, and I would like to watch it again or share it with those who weren't able to tune in. We also encourage you to check out GBBC's other virtual events. We have a presentation this Thursday with Everledger on the rise of Web3 brands and the shift towards value and essentials, and a conversation with Six Digital Exchange CEO Tim Grant the following week on October 20th. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us. Thank you, Sandra. We look forward to hearing more about Algorand's progress and projects in future. Thank you.